Hi there, welcome to theclearskinessentials.com. I'm Natasha St. Michael. Today I want to talk about skincare ingredients I avoid, okay? And these ingredients I avoid are ingredients that give me sort of bad reactions, okay? Either they irritate my skin, they dry out my skin, they clog my pores, give me breakouts, they might even sort of emphasize lines and wrinkles or just make my skin dry and just not healthy. Okay, these are not ingredients that I avoid because somewhere I've read that they're toxic, okay? But these are ingredients that over the years I've come to sort of see patterns in my skincare that contains these ingredients that were giving me adverse reactions. And I've been able to kind of pinpoint, oh, it's that ingredient, or it's this ingredient that's doing this and that. So that's what I want to share with you today, or what are the skincare ingredients that I avoid that mess up my skin. Plus, I also want to share some of the skincare ingredients that are what I consider in the gray zone. I don't necessarily love them, but I don't necessarily hate them either. And they kind of find their way into some of the skincare products that I use, and I don't necessarily completely take them out of my skincare routine, but they're not things that I absolutely love either. So I want to talk about that as well as some of the ingredients that I still use that a lot of people have stopped using. And I feel that it's important for me to be transparent about that, so I'll talk more about that at the end. So let's first get into what are these skincare ingredients that I completely avoid, that it's non-negotiable. I don't want them in any of my skincare. I don't want them in my makeup. I just don't want them on my skin. First ingredient is sodium lauryl sulfate, otherwise known as SLS. And sodium lauryl sulfate is a surfactant. It's kind of like, it's a little bit like soap. It's a detergent, and it can also be used in skincare as a foaming agent. Okay, so a lot of times sodium lauryl sulfate is found in cleansers, it's found in body soaps and body gels, facial cleansers, as well as toothpaste, shampoos, and also household detergents, things like that. Anything that works as kind of a soap to cleanse something that also foams probably contains sodium lauryl sulfate. Now, sometimes sodium lauryl sulfate will actually be in cleansers that don't foam. So it's important always to read ingredients if you get any kind of irritation or problem with sodium lauryl sulfate. Don't just trust because a cleanser doesn't foam that it doesn't contain it. And a good example of this is Cetaphil. I used to use Cetaphil many years ago when I had acne, and it was a step in a better direction using Cetaphil over using something like Oxy or Clearasil, like face wash, things like that. Those things were like super harsh. At least with the Cetaphil, it was a little bit gentler, but it always dried out my skin. And then years later, when one day I was just looking at the ingredients, I was surprised to see that there's sodium lauryl sulfate in it. And it was kind of like, oh, no wonder that was not good for my skin. And for those of you that have sensitive skin that are using Cetaphil, maybe it's something to reconsider, because sodium lauryl sulfate in general I find to be quite harsh. For those of you that have sensitive skin or even just normal skin, like I don't have sensitive skin, but I find whenever I use products that contain sodium lauryl sulfate, over time, it just dries out my skin. My skin, whenever I wash my face with a cleanser that contains it, feels tight, it feels dry. Sometimes my skin can get irritated in the colder winter months, or in sort of drier climates. My skin gets very dry from using it. And there's just so many other cleansers out there to use that are just as effective at washing your face without stripping it of the oils in your skin, And the main thing is that I used to have really oily skin, and I always thought that I needed to use like foaming cleansers and soapy cleansers and gel cleansers to remove that oil and to control the oil in my skin. But I found that the more I removed all of that, the more my body would produce it. And over time, the oil that my body would produce in my skin would just get thicker and worse and would give me more breakouts and more issues. So I've actually found that going the opposite way of actually using a more moisturizing cleanser that doesn't have sodium lauryl sulfate in it or other harsh surfactants in it actually helps to balance my skin, and then my skin isn't triggered to be producing more oil. So that's something that I've said goodbye to many years ago with sodium lauryl sulfate. I avoid it like in everything as much as possible. Even toothpaste, like some of you might, if you ever develop any kind of like redness or raw skin around your mouth or any kind of dermatitis or raised bumps around your mouth, that could actually be coming from toothpaste containing sodium lauryl sulfate. Even some lip balms have it, because sometimes sodium lauryl sulfate, even though like a lip balm isn't a detergent, sodium lauryl sulfate could be used in some formulas as an emulsifier. So it's important, if you have sensitive skin, if you're prone to any kind of dermatitis, I would avoid sodium lauryl sulfate. The next ingredient that I avoid is alcohol. Now, there's two different sort of groups or families of alcohol. There's drying alcohols, and then there's fatty alcohols. And the fatty alcohols, for most people, and myself included, fatty alcohols are fine. They're actually quite moisturizing. So I don't have a problem with fatty alcohols. The alcohols that I have an issue with are the drying ones, and these are like rubbing alcohol or ethanol or SD alcohol, denatured alcohol, alcohol denate, like those things. Those drying alcohols, I have a serious issue. For me, they make my skin super red, and if I use products that contain it for a few days in a row, over time my skin feels like it's gonna fall off. It's so irritating and so drying, and it just doesn't feel good. And the issue I have with alcohol being in skincare products, a lot of times it's in skincare or in makeup, it's in things like sunscreens, it's in foundations, it can even be in creams and stuff, is that it makes the texture of it feel really good. It usually feels very lightweight, feels very cooling, it dries down very quickly. And so at first when you use these products, you're like, wow, this feels really good and it looks good on my skin and I love it. And then you use it like a few days in a row. And then for me, it's like one day I just wake up and my skin is like bright red, irritated, and just terrible. So I like to avoid it in my skincare, especially if it's, I would say, one of the top 3 to 5 ingredients in a skincare product or in a makeup. I would completely avoid it, just because it might not immediately give you any kind of dryness or redness, but over time, especially if you're using it quite regularly, it can cause issues. So for me, I don't like it. I feel like it just dries out my skin. It emphasizes lines and wrinkles, and yeah, and it just makes my skin red and raw. Now, sometimes alcohol and these drying alcohols can be at the very end of the ingredient list of a skincare product or makeup. And if that's the case, usually that's like a very minute amount and it's used as a preservative. For me, I don't have an issue with that. So if it's like the last ingredient of a product, I usually know that that's because it's being used as a preservative, and it shouldn't give me any issues because there's so little of it. So that to me is not an issue. But when it's really like one of the first few ingredients of any kind of product, I would not be putting on your skin. And where you'll find like heavy amounts of alcohol, drying alcohols in skincare and makeup products is usually in toners or essences. They can be in moisturizers and lotions, sunscreens, foundation, anything that dries down very quickly a lot of times has a lot of alcohol in it because it's actually being used to dry down quickly, okay? Or else it's used as a solvent trying to sort of drive active ingredients into your skin. But that solvent itself can be extremely irritating. The next ingredient that I avoid is fragrance, and especially synthetic fragrance. I can't. It's been interesting for me recently is that I've been experimenting with new sunscreens and trying new sunscreens. As most of you know, I live in Bali, Indonesia, and I'm fair skin. And here we don't have much to choose from, right? It's not like being in the States or Canada or Europe where like you can go to a store and there's like 50 different brands to choose from. Here it's very limited what is available. Plus the Indonesian government doesn't allow you to import skincare or makeup online. So I can't just like buy something from like Singapore and have it shipped over to me. It won't come here. So I have to kind of navigate what's available to me. And we do have a lot of Japanese and Korean skincare lines available here. And so over the past 6 months, I've been experimenting with different products, different sunscreens specifically. And especially because there's been so much hype and like it's very trendy right now, a lot of Korean and Japanese brands. And I was quite like shocked just how many of them contain a crazy amount of fragrance and also alcohol in them. And it was almost like every single sunscreen I would try, and especially a lot of these popular ones, were just like seriously irritating. They felt great at first, like the first day or two, but then after that, my face felt like it was gonna fall off. And so it was kind of like my reintroduction to synthetic fragrance and alcohol and some of these ingredients that are just so irritating. And because I haven't used products containing these things in like well over a decade. So my skin, it's not necessarily sensitive, but I'm not used to using products like that. And so I can really feel like what it's really doing and see what it's doing to my skin. So not a fan of synthetic fragrance whatsoever. It's like, you know, unfortunately, it's in so many skincare products, and you really have to look into the ingredients of the products that you're buying and not just trust because something is so popular that it's going to actually contain ingredients that are actually good for your skin. So that for me was like a big wake-up call. And so I like to avoid synthetic fragrance because it irritates my skin. And in general, I'm very cautious with natural fragrance as well. And I'll talk more about that further into this video. But in general, most of the time, if I can find a product that doesn't have natural fragrance either, I would prefer that, just because it's been so many years where I don't use fragrant skincare, you know, and so even though it doesn't give me necessarily a headache to be using it, I just feel more comfortable using products that don't have fragrance in it, just so that it won't cause my skin irritation. Sometimes fragrance is not good with sunlight, and because I live in a very hot climate, that I don't want anything to make my skin sort of sensitized to the sun more so than it already is. So in general, if I can avoid natural fragrance, I will. And I definitely avoid synthetic. So next ingredient, mineral oil. So I'm not a fan of mineral oil, and mineral oil does not give me breakouts. So I know that there's some of you out there that it does, okay? It's mineral oil for some people is totally benign, there's no issue, and other people, they get really bad breakouts. For me, I just don't like the texture of it. I find when I use products that contain mineral oil, it just feels so heavy on my skin, and my skin just doesn't feel, it feels like it's been coated by saran wrap. That's how I can describe it. And so in general, I don't like to use products that contain mineral oil. I'd rather, if it's going to have an oil in it, I'd rather it have like a better oil, something that might actually have some sort of like component to it that's actually good for my skin, right? Like if you use sort of like a jojoba oil or grapeseed oil, like at least these things have vitamins in it, they have antioxidants in it, they have fatty acids in it, things that can actually maybe nourish or protect my skin or be beneficial for my skin. Whereas I find with mineral oil, I don't like the texture of it, I don't like how it feels on my skin, and it doesn't really have anything to it, right? It's just this sort of occlusive kind of agent that just sits on your skin, which for some people that might need something that occlusive, then it could be good. But for me, it just doesn't feel good in my skin, that I'd rather not buy products that contain it. And then another ingredient that I avoid is chemical UV filters. Okay, so in sunscreen, you can either have chemical filters or mineral filters. Personally, and I've done videos about this, is that I prefer, out of all the UV filters out there for sunscreen, where I'm gonna get the best protection from UVA and UVB rays, I prefer mineral sunscreens that contain zinc oxide. Okay, I prefer zinc oxide over titanium dioxide. I prefer zinc oxide over all chemical filters. Chemical sunscreens in general, I had a very bad history using them. So when I was a kid, when we did use them, I was a child from the 70s. So my parents didn't really put much sunscreen on me, but later on, I guess maybe in the 80s, we started to a little bit. I would get hives from sunscreens, and it was always coming from chemical sunscreens. And so it was awful. It was awful because every time I go in the sun, I would get these rashes from like head to toe. And it was terribly uncomfortable. And luckily over time, we were able to kind of connect the sunscreen to the rashes with the sun. And so I would pretty much have to just avoid the sun, or I could get away with using a mineral sunscreen. So I get reactions to chemical filters. I don't necessarily know which ones it is that causes the problem, but obviously it just doesn't work for my skin. That it's something I don't really like to experiment too much with. So in general, I find the best ones for me are ones that are just purely zinc oxide. Sometimes if it has a little bit of a mix with titanium dioxide, that's okay. Or with a chemical filter, sometimes I can get away with it. But in general, if I were to go to a store that had everything available to me, I wouldn't go near the chemical filters. I would just get something that's got at least 15% zinc oxide, get that, wear that every day, and be happy. So yeah, that's my view with the chemical filters, is that I just find them just too irritating. I get hives from them, I can get breakouts from them, and yeah, I just choose to avoid them. Next one is an all-natural ingredient, which is coconut oil. So I get bumps all over my face from coconut oil, from pure coconut oil. I also have noticed here and there that I can get those same bumps from products that contain coconut byproducts, like coconut alkanes and these other sort of ingredients that are derived from coconut. So in general, I have to be careful with skincare products containing coconut oil or made out of coconut oil or other coconut products. Now, do I avoid them completely? It's one of those things that's actually a little bit more in the gray zone. I won't put something on my skin that's pure coconut oil. No way, because I will get covered from head to toe with bumps. And I have to be careful even with like shampoos and conditioners and soaps and personal care products like creams, body lotions, all of that. Anything containing coconut oil, I have to be careful with it. But sometimes I can get away with it. And there are some skincare products I use that do contain coconut oil in it, but it's been formulated in a way that I don't get a reaction from it, or it just might not contain enough of the coconut oil to cause any issues. So in general, whenever I do purchase new skincare, I always do scan the ingredients to make sure there's no coconut oil in there. And if there is, then I keep an eye on it and I watch how my skin responds to it. As soon as I start seeing any kind of texture, raised bumps, I stop using the product. If I don't see any raised bumps or issues, then I continue using it, no problem. Because I'll be honest and say, I actually like coconut oil. I find coconut oil for my hair especially, it's very, very nourishing. So it's one of those ingredients that I wish it worked for my skin, because it could actually benefit my skin or my body or my hair, but unfortunately it causes me to have breakouts. So it's one of those ingredients I do sort of keep an eye on. And then lastly, something that I stay away from that's not necessarily a skincare ingredient, but types of skincare products that I avoid, okay? And these skincare products are skincare products formulated for acne-prone skin. I find all skincare products, or majority of them, whether they're mainstream or natural, products that are formulated for acne-prone skin or product lines that are specifically to get rid of acne, I find them to be way too harsh, too irritating, too stripping, they're just too much, especially for irritated acne-prone skin and especially for breakouts, all of that. I find like acne washes and treatment products and masks and moisturizers, all of that for acne-prone skin, or medicated products, just too harsh. The best advice I got many years ago when I had bad acne was from both an esthetician and from a dermatologist telling me to use products that are formulated for normal skin, because at least it's in the middle. It's not, when you get products that are formulated for acne-prone skin, they're usually just too harsh, they're too strong. And if your skin is already inflamed and irritated from the acne, those products are just gonna just feed that fire. And at the same time, let's say you're a little bit older, right? And you've got skin that's prone to breakouts, but at the same time you want to be treating, let's say, fine lines and wrinkles. I also find that getting products that are formulated for mature skin, sometimes they're too heavy and too rich if you're also prone to getting breakouts. And I find the best solution is when you're buying products, especially from maybe a new brand that you haven't used their products before, go in the middle and get products that are formulated for normal skin, because usually they're not too harsh and they're not too rich. They're just, in the middle, you can see how that is. You can kind of test the waters a lot better than using something that's going to throw your skin off balance, especially if you're like me, that is prone to getting breakouts from skincare products, that is prone to getting kind of like irritation from things that are too harsh. And, you know, you just want to be in sort of like the happy middle. And I would say in general, I would never use like an acne wash or acne masks or any of that stuff. And I would say maybe the only exception would be maybe like a spot treatment. And that's because I would use the treatment just on the pimple. But otherwise, I wouldn't be using that stuff all over my face. No way. So those are the products that I avoid. Now, I want to talk about what are some of the ingredients that are kind of like in the gray zone for me that I don't love, but I don't hate at the same time. And I would say the biggest ingredient that stands out for me is silicones. Okay. Now, I don't have an issue with silicones. Silicones don't give me breakouts. They don't necessarily irritate my skin. But I find when I use skincare products that have a lot of silicones in them is that over the day, they dry out my skin. And it's interesting because a lot of times silicones are added to products to be sort of occlusive and to hold in moisture. But for some reason, as the day progresses, by I would say midday or halfway through the day or by the end of the day, my skin looks lined, wrinkled, and dry. And so I don't like silicones for that reason, is that I just don't like what it makes my skin look like and how it makes my skin feel. And I find though that if I use products that contain small amounts of silicones, I don't have that issue. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is that most of the skincare products I use don't contain silicones. But what does contain silicones are a lot of times sunscreens. Okay, even mineral sunscreens will have silicones in it. And the reason why I believe it's added into sunscreens and sometimes into creams and lotions, things like that, is to make it spread easier and to feel better on the skin. And yeah, and just for like cosmetic purposes, right? So a lot of times what I find is that when I'm buying a product that contains silicones is that when it's halfway down the list or it's at the end of the list of the ingredients, it's usually not an issue for me. But if it's at the top, I have to be very careful with it because I do find it can make my skin appear quite dry. But at the other end of the spectrum, I will say I prefer using a product that contains silicones over using a product like a powder, you know, for shininess. And so that's where I kind of have this gray zone with the silicones, because if it weren't for like just wanting to kind of buffer a little bit of shine on my face, I would normally just use powder instead of products that contain silicones. But as I'm getting older, I find most powders emphasize lines on my face, whereas silicones a little bit less, at least the first few hours of wearing the product. But then by the end of the day, the lines start coming out. So that's the only reason why silicones are kind of like in that gray zone for me, where I don't completely take them out, but I don't completely love them either. But I prefer them for sort of a mattifying part of my face. I prefer that over using powders. Another ingredient, and I've done a video already about this, is essential oils. Those two are in the gray zone for me because I don't like essential oils added to my skincare just for scent. I don't like that. I don't need that. I don't want that. But sometimes I use products that contain essential oils that actually help my skin. They are beneficial for my skin. And I've done videos on this about certain products I've used that had a lot of essential oils that help me with melasma. And they're wonderful. But at the other end of the spectrum, I find that essential oils can be extremely irritating. They can photosensitize my skin, making my skin sensitive to the sun. And I don't find them always to be very useful in my skincare. And plus, I've used products that contained essential oils that have actually burnt my skin. So it's in the gray zone. I don't really love them, but I don't hate them either, because sometimes they can be very beneficial. You know, two out of 10 times they're very beneficial. The other 8 times they can actually wreak havoc on my skin. So that, to me, it's kind of in the gray zone where it's like sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. It depends what the product is, where it comes from, who the formulator was, and how my skin responds to it. And I'll put a link to that video on essential oils talking more about that. But it's one of those ingredients that I love it and I don't. And lastly, I want to talk about the skincare ingredients that I don't mind being in my skincare and in my makeup that a lot of people choose not to, okay? And that is preservatives. So I'm not against preservatives being in my skincare and makeup. As you guys know, I live in Indonesia, it's hot here, and skincare, makeup, and most perishable products go bad very, very quickly here, okay, due to humidity. And so let's say I lived in Canada and I started using a skincare product. Within a year, it'd probably go bad. Whereas here, I would say within 3 to 6 months, it would go bad. It goes bad very quickly. There's been certain products I've used that after opening up the jar, maybe like within 2 weeks, it's growing mold on it. Things get mold fast, okay? Mold and fungus is everywhere here. And so I embrace preservatives because it helps to protect the product, it helps to protect against growing that fungus and mold, and it can prolong the shelf life. So, and I don't have any kind of allergy, I don't get irritation from preservatives, nothing. Whereas some people do, and if that's the case for you, that like certain preservatives give you irritation or dermatitis, things like that, then of course avoid it. But for myself, this is one thing that I don't want to get an infection from a skincare or from my makeup just because I'm trying to avoid preservatives, especially in the climate and the environment that I live in. Now, there's different types of preservatives, and I would say the ones that I'm asked the most about, there's 2 of them, one of which is the PHENOXYLTHANOL. I don't have an issue with that. I don't have an allergy to it. I don't care that it's in my skincare or not. There's not many products I use that actually contain it, so I'm not being exposed to it a lot, but I don't have an issue with it. For me, obviously if you have an allergy to it, you want to avoid it. Now, what about parabens? Parabens, I think that's something that's kind of moving out of skincare in general. I think there's been a big shift over the years of more and more companies finding alternatives and other things to use. Now, is it safe or not? I don't know. I'm not a scientist, and I do know that some people say it's safe. I know some people say it's not. I can say though that I don't really use skincare products that contain parabens, but I'm not super scared of them at the same time. I'm not into being all into like the fear mongering stuff, but if I can find things that I know that are considered to be safer, obviously I'm going to go more in that direction. All right, so that's kind of my view and what I choose to use in my skincare and what I choose not to, and all of that. And I'd be interested in hearing what are the skincare ingredients that you avoid, and what are some of the ingredients perhaps that you don't avoid that other people avoid. I feel like this is a conversation to open up and to hear what works for people and what doesn't. All right, so if you enjoyed this video, please like it, please subscribe. And yeah, I'm wishing everyone a fabulous day, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.